Welcome to this workshop on Islamophobia, Burkini bans and the rise of Islamophobic hate crimes. We're just missing one speaker, but what we'll do is we'll carry on. The idea of the workshop is to hear a few opening words from our speakers, but really then to get ideas from yourselves about what we can do to challenge Islamophobia. Remember, it's been said all throughout the day, what we want to do at this conference is come up with actual activities and real tangible outcomes that we can achieve to challenge racism and Islamophobia. Is that okay? Brilliant. So I'm going to ask each speaker to speak for about maximum about 7 minutes. That's okay. Yeah, sure. And then at the end, what I'll do is I'll take some questions from the floor. Is that okay? When I ask you to ask your questions or your contribution, which is again limited to a couple of minutes at the most, if I can ask you to come to the front. Reason being is because we're filming the workshop, so this will be used later on as well. Okay, so my first speaker is Dr. Siema Iqbal, who's a GP and a columnist and is also a part of MEN. She works to enhance engagement of British Muslims and is a regular blogger. So I'm not going to say anything more. Over to you, Siema.
Have I got a mic?
No, just shout. Stand up.
That's not the two of us.
I know, to be fair, can you hear me at the back?
Yeah.
Yes, awesome. This is what happens when you have two young children. You shout all the time. Okay. I do have a Manchester accent, so if at any point you cannot... Oh, you're filming, sorry. Right. So if at any point you do not understand what I've said, then Azad will translate for me. Okay. Now, earlier this year, France decided to ban the burkini in more than 30 coastal towns on the French Riviera, and suddenly armed police appeared on beaches to enforce what I can only describe as a secular hypocrisy. One striking image that has stuck with me from the summer is the one of the lady being asked to remove her tunic. And let's be honest, it wasn't a bikini, it was a tunic. Since when was it unacceptable to wear a tunic on the beach? But that's not what the debate was about. It's the fact that women are being told what they can and cannot wear. But we all know if it was a Muslim man doing the same, it would be termed oppression. At the same time this lady was being humiliated by the police, the public on the beach didn't defend her, but instead they showed support to the racist and misogynistic laws. The irony is the same people who were on the beach shouting "go home" and applauding the police whilst her daughter was crying are probably the same people who were the first to march and demand the right to free speech. The bikini was designed by Ahida Zanetti, I hope I've said her name right, to give freedom to women. She didn't just design the bikini, she also designed other sportswear, and the intention was to give Muslim women the freedom to engage in activities and integrate and be accepted. Whether women wear it for religious purposes or for personal reasons, women like Nigella Lawson do not wear it for religious purposes. They wear it to stop sunburn. Some women wear it to cover up lumpy bits. It's to be able to do the activities on the beach that they may not otherwise be able to do. It wasn't designed to take freedom away. In fact, 40% of bikini wearers are non-Muslim. The other thing, to state there's a link between wearing a bikini and terrorism is just ludicrous. Remind me, the lorry drivers that killed all the innocent people in Nice, or those that carried out the Charlie Hebdo attack, what were they wearing? Was it a bikini? And let's not forget that 84 of the people that were killed in Nice were Muslim. French politicians say the bikini opposes secular French values. Does anyone remember what secularism is? I do actually struggle with the word secularism, okay? It's a principle that involves two basic propositions. The first is a strict separation of the state from religious institutions. The second is that people of different religions and beliefs are equal before the law. The fact that white French women are allowed to wear full bodysuits and swim caps, which pretty much covers the same area of body as a bikini, without being forced to strip, and nuns will probably be allowed to wear their habits, means they are not equal before the law. The hypocrisy of secularism in France is that the national motto of liberty, equality and fraternity appears to apply only to non-Muslims. Muslims are not equal before the law in France. And banning bikinis is not going to protect the French people from terrorism. It's actually going to do the complete opposite. It will make Muslims feel more isolated, disconnected, and have no sense of belonging. And that only leads to them feeling more vulnerable and being approached and more vulnerable for hate preachers, which in turn can lead to more violence. The ban has been suspended, but it's just one symptom of a disease that is spreading throughout France, America, and the UK and other parts. In France, we've got the rise of the far right. In America, we've got Trump. I don't need to say any more about Trump. In the UK, we have a xenophobic government creating a them and us narrative. Do not be under any illusion. Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, sexism are alive and well here and across the water. And as long as that continues, so will the voices who choose not to remain silent. We need to be vocal on both sides of the debate.
Okay, thank you, Siema. At the back, can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, we have to speak up. Yeah, speak up. Can we do something about the mic? It's gone to have a look. Okay, brilliant. So we will try our best to speak up. Apologies for this, the microphone isn't working. So our next speaker, Rob Ferguson. Rob is part of Newham Stand Up to Racism and is a very active local campaigner and has been challenging Islamophobia and Prevent locally at Newham and nationally. Rob.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, yeah. There may be people here who've heard me speak about Prevent. I'm not going to speak to Prevent in this meeting. I want to start with Hungary. I'll just give a bit of background. My father's parents fled what was then called the Pale of Russia at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, fleeing the pogroms that were launched across that region that consumed tens of thousands of Jews. My mother left Budapest in the 1930s under the anti-Semitic regime of Miklos Horthy, who became an ally of Hitler. And my father, actually he was in Glasgow at the time of Cable Street, so he wasn't at Cable Street, but he was at another big anti-fascist protest against the British Union of Fascists at Olympia. Now actually, in terms of what happened at Olympia, one could say that our side lost. People were beaten to a bloody pulp. The Nazis felt they had won the day. But it was a Pyrrhic victory because they had been exposed for what they were, their violence, their anti-Semitism, and it broke the establishment press under Rothermere from supporting the black shirts to disavowing them. And it laid the ground for Cable Street and what was to come. Why do I say that? Because last Sunday, a week ago on Sunday, there was a referendum in Hungary organised by the far-right ruling party Fidesz, which basically argued, where they campaigned with the backing of millions upon millions of dollars across Hungary to refuse to accept a so-called imposed quota of refugees on Hungary from Brussels, from the EU. And the language, the rhetoric, the narrative surrounding the referendum was one of, and I'm not exaggerating, was one of defending Christian Europe against terrorists, sex molesters, Muslims, and so forth. I read an article by someone who was reporting on their experience a couple of weeks ago on a train. And he described this conversation. A labourer talking to two elderly Hungarian women, saying, "You know who's behind this? influx of Muslim terrorists, don't you? It's George Soros and the Jews. They're sending these invaders in to destroy Europe. And on one level, this sounds so absurd that one is tempted to just scoff. But this is not one isolated conversation. It's a narrative that is spreading on the far right and amongst the fascists across Eastern Europe. There was a demonstration in Poland a couple of months ago, again against the quota of Muslim terrorist refugees. The high point of the demonstration at the end was the burning of an effigy of an Orthodox Jew. Now, I want to say this about Cable Street. Let's just remember, this united Jew, Irish Dockers, non-Jew, left, and indeed Zionists, descendants of the Huguenots, to stop the fascists and Nazis coming in to the East End where I now live. That was the unity, okay? And I think anyone who today uses the rhetoric of division in order to score political points around the question of anti-Semitism or anything else that undermines unity such as that is playing with fire. They should lift their eyes to the horizon, because we're not just talking about an exceptional extreme. We're not just talking about the neo-Nazis of Jobbik in Hungary or the far-right Fidesz government. In Austria we face the possibility of Norbert Hofer being elected as president from his Nazi roots. In Germany we see the AfD. In France, for all the declarations of Marine Le Pen, the anti-Semitic, pro-Vichy, pro-collaborationist, Holocaust apologising tradition of the Front National is alive and well on the ground. And in conditions of crisis, these traditions can come to the fore. So, the last point, before I make my last point, I just want to say this. We can look at those extremes and say, well, you know, we're not like that. I will just say one thing about Prevent. It's couched in all kinds of liberal narratives, all kinds of disavowals, all kinds of disclaimers, okay? But I tell you what, the common narrative it shares with Jobbik, with Fidesz, with AfD, with the Front National, with the Burkini ban, and all the mayors proposing the Burkini ban and all the rest of it, is of a suspect community. An alien threat to our culture that cannot be trusted. People who have to prove their loyalty now, today, tomorrow, next week, upon whom there's always a cloud of suspicion. It's that narrative upon which the far right and the fascists feed. It's the same narrative they fed off against my parents and against the Jewish community of Europe before the Second World War. And they're feeding off it now. And I want to finish really with this, about the kind of movement we need, I believe, to build in every locality, in every college, in every school, in every workplace. It's a movement that captures the unity of cables that we're going to be commemorating tomorrow around Cable Street, of people with different political views and sometimes fundamental differences. We have here in this conference anti-Zionist Jews like myself who support the Palestinian cause. We have Jews who believe that Israel was the only safe place after the Holocaust that Jews could go. I'll tell you what, the fascists of Jobbik, the fascists of the Front National will not ask, is that a Zionist Jew or a non-Zionist Jew? Is that a good Muslim who declares their loyalty to British values, or is it a bad Muslim? They won't ask that question. They will try and destroy us all. And in the face of that, we need that unity. That's not to bury argument, it's not to bury debate, it's not to pretend there aren't principled positions. But we face a task here, and across Europe we see forces of strength that fortunately we do not see here. But we should not think that we're immune. We should not think we're complacent. We have a job to do. Let's get out there and do it.
Thank you, Rob. We're still having microphone problems, so hopefully people at the back can hear. And I think Rob was nice and loud. Well done. Not a teacher by any chance.
I had a sore throat before I came.
It's cleared up. Okay, so the next speaker, Nahella Ashraf, she's also part of Stand Up to Racism from Manchester, another Mancunian who I will happily translate for you. She is a leading activist in the anti-racism movement. She doesn't really need any more introduction. Nahella.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Yeah. I've never been told that people can't. Those of you that came in earlier might have heard me in reception when I was shouting very loudly. Someone did say this morning, did I need a megaphone? And I don't know why, they clearly didn't know me very well. But, I am a Muslim woman, so, there is some reason there for people to think maybe my voice can't be heard. Because we hear so much, don't we, about us Muslim women being submissive, traditionally submissive. We don't apparently have a voice. And in all of that narrative that runs through, they never actually ask Muslim women, do they? I mean, no one's actually come up to me and said to me, well, have you got a voice? Are you oppressed? Mind you, I don't think they want to know the answer, to be honest. Let's be quite honest there. But you see, it is interesting that never before have we heard an attack on any community the way you do around Muslims, in particular Muslim women. You see, on one hand, I'm submissive and I need to be protected, and I need to be brought out of my community, and that's why there's all these threats about, well, we need to stop her from wearing that, or we need to, if she doesn't speak English well enough, we're going to deport these women, because apparently, we're all oppressed and all the rest of it. So on one hand, we're submissive, and we're traditionally submissive, and we need saving. On the other hand, apparently, the way I dress reinforces my belief in terrorism. Somehow it indicates that I am shunning British values, that I am the problem among society. Isn't that quite shocking? I'm either submissive or I'm a terrorist. I can't, and they're such extremes, aren't they? It's not even like there's any how can you be oppressed and so submissive and at the same time being such a threat to British values? But it's really interesting, isn't it? Why are Muslim women at the forefront of this? Are we such an easy target that they want to point the finger at us and blame us for just about everything? I mean, Salma spoke in the earlier session about how we are to blame for the housing crisis, the queues of the NHS, pretty much everything. It's unbelievable. And why is that? You see, lots of people talk about, we've seen the level of racism go up over the last 10 years or so, and really the height of Islamophobia has come as a result of the war on terror. Now, I would argue it did start with the war on terror, and Salma was very right when she said that when we campaigned against the illegal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan around the issue of racism, because actually that's what was going to happen, as well as killing innocent people over there, we're going to increase racism in this country. We have seen that. But actually, the rhetoric against Muslims, this level of Islamophobia that we've seen, especially over the last few years, isn't correlating with our foreign wars. It's quite clear that there's something more going on here. And for that, I would say, actually, yes, it started off with the war on terror, but actually now, it's so much more than that. We are now to blame for all the problems in the world. When the Tories want to bring in all sorts of cuts up and down, and attack the welfare state, they like to tell us that actually the biggest problem, the biggest threat to British values is Muslims and Muslim women in particular. That we are the threat. Actually, it's nothing to do with their cuts. And what does that mean? It means that it distracts us from blaming and actually pointing the finger at the real problems in society. The bankers, the Tory millionaires in the cabinet who have no idea what it's like to live, as working class people in Britain today. They have no idea what it's like to worry about paying your the rent and your accommodation, or your next paycheck, or what have you. The fact that so many people in Britain now are having to depend on food banks. I heard some Tory ministers say that it was a choice. Can you believe that? As if it was a choice to depend on food banks. A lifestyle choice. These people are so out of touch, and yet at the same time, they are busy pointing the finger at the Muslim community. What are they doing? Making us the other. Distracting us from the real issues that are going on here. And actually, it's not just Muslim women. It's across the board with the Muslim community. You heard earlier today a speaker from the Rotherham 12 campaign Let me just give you a bit of explanation around that, because basically what happened is in Rotherham they had 14 demonstrations by the far right. And it's quite interesting because when the far right come to a city, this happens up and down the country actually, and it's happened for a number of years. The far right will come to your city, and rightfully so, the anti-racists will organise a demonstration against that far right march, as they should be. But actually people won't know this, but while anti-racist campaigners are organising demonstrations against the far right, the police and the authorities in each of our towns and cities will be going to the Muslim community saying, actually, we don't want you coming out that day. We don't want you joining the anti-racist march. If we see you on the streets, we're going to be looking at what you're doing. We're not going to tolerate you being on the streets. And at the same time, they did in Bolton, funnily enough, they sent letters home to every primary school child saying, if you're of Asian, you're from the Asian community, if you're a member of the Muslim community, stay in on the day that the Nazis come to your town, because we can't defend you. Lock your doors, shut down your businesses and draw your curtains. This is what they're saying. This is what's happening in the Muslim community. When I say that we are second-class citizens, that's exactly what's happening. Because when the authorities say, when the Nazis come to your town, we won't defend you, you know, stay indoors, can you imagine them saying that to any other community? No. Can you imagine them saying to the North Manchester, we have a very strong and vibrant Jewish community. Can you imagine saying to the Jewish community in North Manchester, I'm sorry, you need to stay indoors because the Nazis are coming. We can't defend your homes and your businesses. It would never happen. But when it comes to the Muslim community, it's acceptable. Why? Because we don't have the same rights as everybody else. That is what is happening here. Let's be quite clear about this. And what's happened with the Rotherham 12 is be clear on this, it was 14 demonstrations and the Muslim community didn't come out. They waited until an old man on his way home from prayers was murdered by the far right when they decided to stand together in solidarity and say no more. We will no more be victims. And they came out on the streets, and when they did that, the police decided to arrest 12 of those individuals. These guys have no criminal record whatsoever, but they are facing serious charges or are presently in court. So if you are anywhere near Sheffield, I would urge you to go and support them on the court case. It's being heard on Monday. It's going to go on for a number of weeks. Go out there and stand in solidarity with them. Let's show the authorities that we will not allow you to point the finger and isolate the Muslim community. We've heard a lot today about unity, and actually I think that unity that is represented in this conference is what is going to help us succeed. You see, they like to divide us, but actually our strength is in our unity. And there is more of us than them, so please come out, stand together, let's beat the fascists.
Nahella, for that. Very motivating. And we're going to have one more speaker, Khalil Charles, who's going to speak, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor for quick comments if you want to make comments, but primarily what I'm looking for is, and what we're looking for is, what can we do? What can we do in terms of challenging what we're hearing and talking about? Khalil Charles is a member of the Muslim Association of Britain, a grassroots organisation with branches across the country. I don't think I need to say anything more than that.
That's
Khalil,
right.
over to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Yes, Muslim Association of Britain is a grassroots organisation, and because of that, we are at the forefront of the bigotry, Islamophobia, and racism that has been directed against the community. And we were privileged, if that's the word, to have an attempted arson attack on one of our mosques in Finsbury Park some months ago. You might recall that the CC camera revealed a young man throwing over a petrol bomb, which landed just short of the gas installation where it could have done a lot of damage. Fortunately, the rains were pouring down that day, and that he didn't actually catch alight. And the manager of the mosque, Mohammed Khuzba, who's done some sterling work and has received awards in that mosque for the way in which the mosque has reached out to the community. Finsbury Park Mosque is, of course, in the same constituency as the leader of the opposition, who doesn't need to be named. But it's that the day that I remember very well is the coming together of all shades, colours, religious persuasions, etc., in a demonstration that happened outside that mosque in support of and against the Islamophobic and racist mentality that was brewing in that area. And it is the question of unity that my other speakers have been talking about that is so important. I'm reminded by an American educator, her name is Jane Elliott, you may know her, who does this experiment about racism. And one of the classes she was talking about, she was saying that, and she was talking to a white audience, and predominantly, and she was saying, is anybody in the audience happy with the way that society treats our black people, with the way society treats our minorities? And is anybody prepared to stand up in order to replace them, to be in their position? And I think we're moving towards a situation where none of us in the room are prepared to accept the way in which our Eastern Europeans, the way in which our black people like myself and Muslims are being treated in this country. And this growing phenomenon, and I'm afraid it is growing, okay, is actually being pushed by people who are supposed to be responsible, but who are giving the message that it is okay to make statements like Islam is a cancer that needs educating, multiculturalism doesn't work in this country, clear them all off to the desert with camels, that's their way of life. That comes from, I don't need to name him, comes from a politician, a British politician in this country. Another British politician said, I'm visiting the city of Birmingham, where my good friend Martin Begg is from, recently, and I felt like a foreigner in the city of my birth. All around me, I could hear sounds of jabbering in an alien voice. We also have a Pakistani and Somali. Tell me, and he was speaking then to Mr. Cameron, why the men wear their pajamas. Also, another British politician from a British party who is representing people in councils and parliaments. This is what is fueling the racist and Islamophobic mentality, when people in responsible positions come out and say these things and absolutely nothing is done to counter their kind of speech. And on both those occasions, those two people were, in fact, they stepped aside after public pressure. And this is what we need to do. We need to continue that public pressure. In a piece, he described the Muslim leader of Turkey as having sex with a goat. He actually won £1,000. Do you know what I'm talking about? You do. You do.
Who?
Yeah, Mr. Johnson. Everybody calls him Boris. He won £1,000 for writing a very offensive. You know, fine. You could say it's a joke, isn't it? It's a quib. It's no problem. You know, we can deal with that. You know, it's fine. Yeah, it's just a. Was it banter? A lock on. What's the phrase? Yes. So he said he was having sex with a goat, and also he found a word to match the word Ankara. Okay, that's one of our politicians. The same politicians who said that Barack Obama had a problem because of his Kenyan ancestry. When public figures make these pronouncements, what do you think the ordinary Tom and John and Bill, racist and bigot is going to do? This gives them the fuel, and this gives them the reasons to out themselves and come out and do some of these things. So my point is, and I won't take you too long, is that provided these things continue, and provided that those at the top continue to make these racist statements and act in this racist way, then the powder keg, which is civil unrest, which is social discohesion, is going to let off in our streets. Have we seen in the 60s when there were riots, and in my family's generation, in my parents' generation, in the 70s, and the early 80s, in my generation, in Tottenham and Brixton, etc., you're going to see repeats of this. And this is why meetings like this is so important. This is why solidarity behind these issues means that we have to stand up and be counted, and we have to make racist and Islamophobic people feel uncomfortable. I think you have the message. I think it's a very important one, and I thank you indeed for the time to speak. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. so in terms of responses, questions and suggestions, if you can put your hands up, and I'm going to try to take probably 4 people at the same time, so I'm going to ask you to come to the front. So 2 ladies from here, a gentleman there and a gentleman there. If you guys can come to the front, and then you can get filmed asking your question.
Oh my God!
If you don't want to, you can stay where you are and ask a question. It's not something that you have to do. But if we can make it brief and then...
To follow on from what you were all saying, at the importance of solidarity and action. I remember in the, well, I'd have been about 25, so it's about 50 years ago. We had, I worked in a bookshop opposite the university in Leeds, and we weren't allowed to wear trousers. And we organised the staff, I mean, it wasn't a union shop at the time, and we won and we started wearing trousers. It really horrifies me that 50 years later we are being told as Muslim women to dress immodestly, or as men or the establishment want. I remember Jack Straw, a councillor up north, saying, poor fella, that he felt uncomfortable if women were covering themselves. How does he manage on the phone? You know, he wants to see more than our eyes. That really shocks me. I don't wear a hijab, it makes me look about 20 years older. But I actually think a lot of young women are showing us the way forward. A lot of young Muslim women who 10 years ago weren't wearing the hijab are now wearing the hijab. And I actually think we all ought to start thinking about wearing the hijab. You know, women can't get picked off if we're all doing it. The final point I want to make is there's always been racism in Britain, and there's always been hatred. The British troops were trained after the Second World War to shoot at targets wearing helmets, German Huns, and they were caricatured, they were figures of hate, because you have to train soldiers to hate enough to kill. During the Cold War, when we'd made friends with Germany, Arabs were used with Arab headdresses. They were again hate figures. Now I don't know whether that's still going on, but it's something we ought to be finding out about. So yes, solidarity and organising, and the more of us are doing it, the better.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sam. I'm an occupational therapist and I work in the NHS at Barts Health. And I just wanted to say a bit about what we've been doing there, because in the hospitals, as you all know, we've faced massive cuts and massive attacks, and the junior doctors, we've had some brilliant times standing on the picket lines with them, and with the lots of different nationalities of people supporting all the doctors. But what I really want to say is we need to have a really united workforce in the NHS if we're going to fight off the attacks and all this creepy privatisation and Virgin and all these companies taking over. And that means we've got to be united, and that's why I think Stand Up to Racism is really brilliant. So what we've done at work is that we've had some stalls, and we're setting up in the canteen. And when the thing about the burkini came up, the first thing I did when I walked into work with all the Muslim women that I work with, I said, I want a burkini in solidarity with you. And I think that's the sort of things we need to say, because it is scary, and some of the Muslim women I work with are frightened about all the attacks that's happening. And I think it's important for us as white women workers and men, you know, to be in solidarity with them. And I think the other thing is what we did is that I said, well, you're not traditionally submissive, so come down and run a stall with me. So I got 2 of them to come down, and we had a stall outside the canteen, and it went really well. And I had a Greek occupational therapist as well, they've never done anything like that before, ever. And we put some posters up, and we had leaflets, and we also had the T-shirts for supporting the refugees in Canada. We did a collection, and they were stunned by the number of people that came up and talked to us. So many people said, oh, we're really glad you're here, that's really brilliant. And I think, God, we've got to be doing this everywhere, not just, you know, in the NHS. And it was excellent, and funny enough, I never get permission to do these things, I just sort of do it. And the manager of the canteen came out to us and said, oh God, here we go, another canteen saying we can't do it. And he said, he's just been on a diet and he's lost loads of weight, and he wanted to give us loads of clothes for Calais. So, although I'm not sure how many big fat people in Calais. But anyway, that's really good. So, and he's now allowed us to have a meeting in the canteen in 2 weeks. So we're going to have our first Stand Up to Racism meeting. And that's
My name's Danny, and I run a group called LGBT Plus Against Islamophobia, which hopefully some of you have heard of. The group's been going for over a year as a banner, but it's been going as an active campaigning group since April of this year. And I just wanted to share with you a few of the things that we're doing to combat Islamophobia within the LGBT and wider communities, and also just a little brief explanation about why we think it's important for the LGBT plus community to stand up to racism, specifically Islamophobia. And it's really because the government and the media like to use homophobia as a dividing block between the LGBT plus and Muslim communities. And we on the ground know that that's not true, and we know that's not our experience of engaging with the Muslim communities. And in fact, our group has received nothing but support and solidarity from people in that community and every community. But the government time and time again say these people hate you, they want to throw you off buildings, they want to shoot you, and worse things besides. And in fact, people from our own community are posting on our Facebook page like 3 times a day saying, I'm a gay man, supposedly, and I think what you're doing is ridiculous. This is like Jews for Nazis. You know, I get stuff like that on a day-to-day basis. And that's why it's important. And the sort of things that we're doing to try and engage people, well, we're quite open to new ideas at the moment because we're still a fairly new group. But throughout the summer, we had a massive campaign around Pride. We went to so many Prides across the country and signed up so many people to our cause, and the group just blossomed. We've now got branches in Leeds, in Newcastle, and somewhere else that I can't remember off the top of my head. We're also now gearing up for Islamophobia Awareness Month, which many of you will know is in November. So we're going to be doing a massive campaign with colleges, with schools, with universities, where we're going to go and run workshops in the campuses, engaging the LGBT community, certainly, who often are very fearful of engaging with anything to do with Islam because of what they read in the newspapers. And having someone like me and like many of my friends, some of whom are in this room, coming and saying, do you know what, you don't need to be afraid, come, we'll take you, we'll introduce you to people, you can see that it's not true for yourselves. And we've approached many people that way, and we've had some real successes. And the other thing that we're doing, which is something I'd recommend everybody considers doing, is signing up with local organisations who you may not think are particularly relevant to Islamophobia. So like, we've just started a partnership with the Camden LGBT Forum, the biggest LGBT forum definitely in London, I think maybe even in the country, and they are now like outsourcing all of their Muslim LGBT related things to us to do, which is putting us on the map. So consider different groups and different ways to link things, because ultimately it's all related, it's all linked. You just got to be creative with your linking. So if you're interested, then come and talk to me at the end as well, and I'll be around for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you very much, and thank you to all speakers.
Stand here.
Yeah.
I am Reverend Joshua from Birmingham. Of course, I come on my own, but I'm a priest in the Church of England. And we promote a lot of links with Islamophobia related issues in Birmingham. We work a lot. For me, recently we got a circular saying that don't wear your collar in public, otherwise you will be targeted, you will be killed. We received from the government, that's quite interesting, as a priest. And it's also the second thing is, for me, when we relate to, at grassroots level, we learn a lot of things. But what I would like to suggest is this. I think name and shame is very important. We have to identify some of the media which is actually triggering all this fear among the public. But through ignorance and through a lot of, selectivity. And of course, I was talking in the morning, reductionism. Take one case as if it is true of everyone in that religion and community. And I think this is where we need to identify those media which are promoting this ignorance and ask people to boycott those media and the institutions. And that is one. And also we need to promote the literacy of, of the people and community otherwise, which we are trying to do with, in various ways through religious literacy and Islamic literacy. And interestingly, I will tell you, in a month's time or 2 months' time, we are going to establish a center, interfaith center in Birmingham, which is run by a Muslim institution and a Christian institution. Both Muslim institution is training imams, and the Christian institution is training Christian priests. We are going to combine both and set up a center for interfaith, which will promote ideas and education against Islamophobia. And we hope we will all stand together, not only Muslims who speak about Islamophobia, but also Christians. We support that, and I think the phobia is a sickness of the society, Islamic phobia. And I say, from a Christian perspective, I have read 11 years Quran. Islam is the most peaceful religion of this world.
Thank you.
Besides being Christian. Thank you.
The lady there, yeah, if you can stand up, the lady there and the lady there, yeah, if you stand up, both of you, brilliant, and I need a bloke. There's a bloke, yeah. Okay, so,
I'm a teacher and in Hackney and a member of Hackney Stand Up to Racism. And I think the whole issue of British values is something that you really have to actually engage with in schools and colleges and elsewhere, because it's an absolutely, when you start sort of breaking it down, it's an absolutely pernicious idea that we all have one identity, and that identity is tied up with our nationality. And as a colleague of mine just was saying to me at lunchtime, you know, my family comes from India, I live in London, what is my identity, why am I being forced to choose? And I think, I think that is something that's incredibly important in large numbers of schools and colleges, where students are being told, in effect, you've got to sign up to these values. And also, and of course, when you start looking at those values, so many of them are tied up with lots of particularly unpleasant values like colonisation and racism and, the whole history of the British Empire, which got us there. And I think you have to sort of think of, certainly within school, I think you have to think about ways in which you can actually challenge that narrative and actually say, hang on a second, what does this represent? And what kind of alternative human values do we actually want to build? Because, I think otherwise you are really creating a very dangerous situation where, you are disempowering students and staff actually, because I think it's, it sort of cuts people into one mould. I think in schools, which is what I know about, not colleges, there is huge pressure on schools about this, because basically of Ofsted, if Ofsted come in and you don't tick all the boxes, you can immediately fail your Ofsted, get forced into academy status, etc, etc, etc. But I think there are ways of fighting back, and I'm not claiming my school's a model, but I think something we have consistently done is we have actually done lots of stuff around equalities and so on and so forth. And I think once you start talking about equalities at all, I think you can actually start breaking down that idea of British values and challenging it. Last year we had a sort of dinner in support of refugees. We had a sleep in the playground, sort of sleeping out in tents. We did collections. All our students got involved in doing collections around the school and raising the issue. And I think actually if you start doing that kind of stuff, you can actually start breaking down those sort of very backward attitudes around British values, which I think is really important.
Brilliant.
And I'm also a primary school teacher in North London, and I just want to take up this issue about the right and the far right thinking that in some way they can attack the Muslim community in the name of women's liberation. And I think that we just have to be really clear in saying that actually there is nothing liberating about racism, and there's nothing liberating about telling a woman what she can or cannot wear. And if you look back to November of last year, 2015, after the attacks in Paris, the shootings, who was it that actually bore the brunt of that? In this country, attacks on Muslim women went up by 300%. And mostly those are on women wearing the hijab or wearing the veil. And I think that that's an issue that we really need to take up. And around the issue of what we can do, I mean, in my classroom, I taught last year a class of majority Muslim kids, and we talked about Islamophobia, and I said, how many of you are aware or have experienced Islamophobia? Almost the entire class put their hands up. And now you're seeing these statistics coming out of something like 33% of girls aged 7 to 10 are worried about their body image, worried about being judged about how they look. And I think that really we have to be saying, in our workplaces, if you work in education, it's brilliant that we're now launching Teachers Stand Up to Racism, because actually this is something that we can both be building for as far as within our unions, standing up to racist attacks when they happen, but also saying, how do we want our education to be? We want our kids to be educated in a way that says, actually, racism needs to be fought back against. Race actually doesn't exist. You cut underneath the skin and we're all the same underneath. And I think that's the agenda, that's the way that we need to be fighting back. So, yeah.
My name's Chris, I'm from South Wales. I grew up in the 70s and saw people leafleting outside my school for the National Front, and then I saw the way the Anti-Nazi League and the Rock Against Racism movement called it for what it is, called them Nazis, called them out, and actually beat them off the streets. When I lived in France in the mid-80s, I had massive rows amongst the French left because they would not call the Front National Nazis. They refused to call it what it is, they refused to call it fascism, they refused to call it out. And it has led, as you know, to the growth of the Front National and to the narrative in France, which meant that several years ago, when they decided to ban the veil in schools, people on the left said, oh yes, because we fought for years to get the cross out of the school and this is about secularism and it's not about racism. The left again refusing to call it what it is. Now I have friends of mine on Facebook who are now beginning to see, shit, what have we done, when they see women at gunpoint on the beach being told what to wear. They are just now beginning to wake up, but it's far, far too late. So I think, in answer to the question, what can we do? We do what we did with the Anti-Nazi League and with Rock Against Racism and with UAF. We get together. Everybody goes back from today to their locality, takes the Stand Up to Racism pack, builds a local movement. We have to make this the broadest possible movement because that's what they didn't do in France. And make no mistake about it, if we don't do it, they will come for us. So we all need to stand united, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, yeah, so the gentleman there, yeah, standing up.
Yeah, thank you. Roger Lewis, I'm here from DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts. Disabled people are very sadly familiar with many of the experiences we're hearing about at this meeting and this fantastic event here today. In the 6 years we've been singled out by this government for attacks, in our case mainly through the attacks on welfare benefit cuts. And the backdrop to them enabling to do that was to separate us out, to other us, to make us apart from the rest of society. And there's a target that they could aim their attacks at, and the backdrop to this was a continuous diatribe of hatred towards disabled people by politicians and through the press and media. You know, about benefit cheats, scroungers. People who are work shy, and it's very, very effective because what we saw during this, and 4 years ago the Paralympics in London, and the second week of the Games there, we saw disability hate crime rise. So, but as disabled people, we knew that in terms of our fighting back against this, we're smart, we know our history. Our movement started back in the 1960s, and it started by coming out of what was then the civil rights movement that happened in the States. And then we saw the LGBT community and women's movements develop out of that, and that's where the disability movement came. We knew that, and we knew that if they were coming for us, they were going to go for other groups as well. So it wasn't a surprise for us that in the last general election, we were being approached by groups like UKIP and others who were saying, actually, it's terrible these attacks on you. No, who's really to blame on this? It's those migrants, it's those refugees, it's work-shy communities in Britain who don't want to be part. You know, and they just attempt to divide us. So I'm proud that what we did within DPAC there was at our national conference was to pass a resolution that being a member of DPAC, being a member of UKIP was incompatible with being a member of DPAC. And we fought against that idea. So DPAC is proud to be a co-signatory and supporter nationally of Stand Up to Racism. And I'll finish with exactly what the last speaker said. That what we now need to see around is Stand Up to Racism and Islamophobia groups around the country. With groups like school students against racism and Islamophobia, local government workers against racism and Islamophobia, teachers against racism and Islamophobia, and we'll be there with disabled people against racism and Islamophobia.
So you volunteered yourself, that's fine. You can go next, and the gentleman there in the red shirt, and yourself, and yes, lady there. Okay. So in that order.
Caris, can you hear me? Sweet. Hi, my name's Antara. Hi, my name's Antara. I was a peer outreach worker, so that means I was working with the youth of London. And so in terms of my work was engaging, and so to answer your question of what can we do to actually create less Islamophobia is engagement. So that means, but for me it was within the arts. I'm an artist, so that's within street art, music, even just anything, just to feel a form of expression, to express what it is, the heart of what the problem is. So, and just encouraging that within the youth, because that's where the next generation is, to bring them both in, to find another way of understanding why we are of the situation, and that was it.
Thank you very much.
I'm Peter from Oxford. Just in terms of strategy, something that stuck out to me is when we've all been laughing and joking about Amber Rudd's idea of listing foreign workers. What about something like we do, you know, hands off my workmate or hands off my colleague if we're a student or we're a kid at school, something like that. And of course, that'll reflect the diversity of Britain as well. So just something like that, a petition, pictures, hands off my workmate, hand off my classmates, that kind of thing. I know it's a bit of a northern word, so bear with me. If anyone can think of a better term, that's fine. It's also a bit laddish, I guess.
You're all right, mate. That's fine. Okay, yes, lady there.
Assalamualaikum. Hi everybody, my name is Spira, I'm from Kirkland Unison, PUC, Huddersfield. I'm a sports leader in school. Sorry? I'm a sports leader in school. I live in Dewsbury where Mohammed Sadiq Khan and terrorists live. We had a very bad reputation because the media made it
There you
really
go,
bad.
try that out. Might have to start again.
The media made it really bad for our area. The children were getting picked on, you know, when they were playing the streets, going shopping. So we did a twinning with the schools. So the schools come to our school, we have an event there, we take them to mosque, show them, you know, what we do at the mosque, and then our school goes to their school, they take us to the church, we have an event at the church, and then, you know, vice versa. We've been doing that past over a year, and it's been really good. We've worked it out that we're not all that bad. But because I think we need to start from a younger age, that we are not all bad, we are not terrorists, we are not all that bad. We are all equal, and we need to start from the children, because if the children's got in their head that, you know, they should go back to their own country, they shouldn't have that. I think we need to teach the younger generation first, not the older ones, and maybe some of them will go back and tell the parents. Thank you.
Thanks, I'm Esme, I'm a health worker. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about how it seems that Muslim women's bodies have become a central battleground in the fight over racism. And it's not just in France, where I think the bikini ban is one of the most shocking things that I've seen in recent years, but it's happening across Europe. Somebody talked about what happened with Jack Straw. I lived in the northwest at that time. I remember very much his vile comments about Muslim women who wear the face veil. I don't know if people also heard about the case earlier this year in Germany, where a Muslim woman who wore the face veil had the temerity, when she was racially abused at a train station, to take that person to court for racist abuse. And when she went to court, she was told by the judge that unless she removed her veil, he would throw her in prison and not him. And under that threat, eventually, she lifted her veil in limited circumstances, but she felt forced into doing that. And the judge still ruled against her and ruled in favour of her the guy who racially abused her. And what the judge said at that time was that he needed her to lift her veil in order to be able to read her emotions. Well, I'm sorry, but if you've been racially abused and then attacked by the state when you actually try and seek justice, I don't think you actually have to see somebody's face to understand what sort of emotions they might be going through at that particular time. And when it comes on to the question of what do we do, I think the most important thing is that we say this is not a problem for Muslims, this is a problem for all of us. And when they use women's bodies in this way, sometimes the state tells us that we're wearing too little. I don't know if people remember all the campaigns that we've had over the rights of women to wear what they want to and not be blamed if they're sexually assaulted. And it's exactly the same question. People have the right to wear what they want, where they choose. And Islamophobia is not a Muslim problem, it's a problem for all of us, and the fight against racism has got to be for all of us. And going from this conference, we have to build groups everywhere, in workplaces and in communities, that when things happen, the brother talked about the attack on Finsbury Park Mosque. That's not the only mosque that's been attacked. I remember a few years ago being in Muswell Hill when there was an arson attack on the mosque there. There have been attacks on mosques in numerous places, and we have to make sure that the responses to those are not just Muslim responses. They bring together black and white unity, and they bring together the trade union movement, and they bring together the power of people in this country who will stand up and say no to racism.
Okay, I've got time for probably 2 more respondents or comments if someone wants to put their hand up. So 1 there, any more? Okay, that'll be the last one, and I'll get the panel to respond back. Do you want to? Yeah? Okay.
Hi, my name is Sharon and I'm a director of a social enterprise called Revolution Hive. We're based in Birmingham and London, and it's all about real life lessons for young adults. So we go in and we do workshops about racism, gender, finance, all the things that mainstream education doesn't focus on. And I think, as a few people have mentioned already, the important thing is getting young people to think about these things. If you never create these stereotypes and these prejudices in your mind from the beginning, and all these things that the media projects onto people, we won't have this problem hopefully in the future, because the next generation will grow up not having these ideas of division and things like that. So it's really important, and if anyone is interested in getting us to come to schools that you know of, then please let me know and find me.
Hi, I'm Sanzida. I am merely just a student, I'm only 15. And I think the point I'd like to make is just to reiterate all of what the teachers and the speakers here have said. In order for Stand Up to Racism and just any organisation to contact local schools in their area to sort of just advocate that Islamophobia is a problem, because the PSHE lessons you get in schools, especially from where I come from, from a low socio-economic background in Tottenham, the PSHE lessons are they don't advocate what problems there are in the area and in society. And it's so unbelievable how much the youth has an impact and how much of a voice we actually have. And we're so underrepresented that not many of the youth know that these sort of conferences exist in the first place. And that is exactly what I just want to say. So please, contact your local schools and speak to them. Organise workshops and activities, because seriously, they will enjoy it and they will take so much away from it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask our panel just to respond back a minute each, please, to what you've heard so far. I say a minute, but I'm sure you're going to take a little bit longer.
No, I'm trying to take a minute.
Okay, brilliant. I want to time you.
It's very heartwarming to hear what people have been saying, and indeed the message that our last speaker gave is one that has to resonate throughout this room, and indeed outside of this room as well, in our cities and our towns. We at the Muslim Association of Britain, and you forgive me if we do plug what we're doing, next week we're going to be having the Best of British Muslims, which basically is a celebration of Muslims in this society. Muslims that are part and parcel of every walk of society will be represented, and there'll be really a fun time to be had. It's in Birmingham, if you can get there, Birmingham New Bingley Hall, and it's next week on the 15th, and it's somewhere I think not just Muslims ought to be, but everybody who's made that plea today to stand up against Islamophobia and to stand up against racism. This will be an opportune time for you to network and to meet people of the faith, and indeed ordinary working class British people and all the rest of that. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay.
Is it on? I've just asked, is it on? I'm going to stand up so the people at the back can see me. I'm going to take slightly longer than a minute because I didn't take up my 7 minutes earlier. Well, you told 5. Well, I was told 5, and then he said 7, so I've got a few minutes to spare, and I probably just killed a minute just giving the explanation. But I wanted to say, firstly, I feel quite uplifted from this conference, because I feel I, as a Muslim, am not going to be fighting Islamophobia on my own, and that is a credit to all of you in this room today. I will be speaking at the plenary shortly, so I'm not going to repeat what I'm going to say there, but one thing I did want to say was Islamophobia, yes, it exists in terms of, verbal abuse, it exists in terms of physical attacks, but it's now getting to the stage where it's infiltrating people's lives and it modifies their behaviour. And I'm going to give you a personal example of this. I'm actually a mum, I've got 2 kids, a 9-year-old boy and a 5-year-old boy. Both are absolute terrors. No, I didn't say terrorists, yeah. And this is how it modifies behaviour in our house, and you don't realise it until it happens. So last year, for example, we're sat on a plane doing our very British, all-inclusive holiday to a very British type of resort. And my child, my 9-year-old, is afraid of flying. So the plane starts to take off, and I said to him, oh, just say one of your prayers. He goes to mosque, he knows his prayers much better than I do. He says his prayers, and the plane's taking off, and he starts reciting an Arabic prayer out loud. The sheer panic, yeah, and I'm ashamed actually to say that I turned to him and I said, don't say it out aloud, because I didn't want to get thrown off that plane. That is how Islamophobia modifies your behaviour. And it happens in our house all the time, and you don't realise it at the time. So I need you all to help me build the fight against Islamophobia.
Actually, Simon talked about how behaviour changes, and actually I can give you loads of examples of those. I've had friends that have talked about how they're worried that they've got children at primary school level who are going to say something in school. So I've had women talk to me about how they want to, they're thinking about homeschooling their children. The very thing that the government likes to tell us, oh, you know, we want integration, we want Muslims to be part of the wider community, but actually their actions are having the complete opposite effect. Why? Because of fear. You know, how do you say to a young child at the age of 5 or 6, well, you can't talk about that in school? But that's exactly what's happening. I've got examples of, you know, groups, you know, my own girlfriends who we go out on a night out and they will say, oh, I can't stay out too late, I'm scared about using public transport, or I've got to ring my husband because he needs to come pick me up because I don't feel safe on the tube. That's a situation, and it's actually quite serious. But I do also want to say this. We talked a lot about how bad things are, but actually, it doesn't have to be that way. It's not inevitable that we see the growth of racism. We can beat it in this country. We have a history of standing together and beating the racists. And it's really important to say that. You see, those that, you know, organise society, who think they run the world, you know, the government and the media and all the rest of it, they like to rewrite our history. They like to tell us it was those that changed the world, but actually we know that's not true. We know it's working class people up and down the country who have come together and beat the fascists. I mean, they talked about Cable Street. It was working class people, ordinary working class people in London who came together and pushed back the racists. We did it then and we can do it now. It's really important to say that, but this is our struggle. All of us are in this fight, and actually when you think about what we're up against, when you think about the Tory government, the austerity, the Brexit negotiations, things can get worse, but actually we can beat them, we can push it back. But how? By getting organised. Up and down the country we need anti-racist groups. We need stand-up to racism groups in every workplace, in every college, in every school. Because we need a different kind of society. Not one divided and points the fingers and creating an other amongst us, but one that stands in solidarity and unity and actually push back the racism, push back the fascists. Thank you.
I want to illustrate my point with this. You see, I don't accept that the rationale that's given for the Burkini ban, or Shaw's statements about the veil, or for that matter Michael Wilshaw, the Chief Inspector, casting doubt on the ability of young women in the hijab to learn, I don't think that has anything to do with the reasons advanced. I don't think it has anything to do with the defence of a principle of separation of church and state. Because it's not the first time that religious dress has been attacked in these terms and in these ways. Last time I looked, Tsar Nicholas I was not a Democrat. Last time I looked, he was not a defender of the separation of church and state. Tsar Nicholas I in the 19th century issued the following abolitions. Jewish women could no longer wear turbans, headdresses, garments of Jewish cut, other clothing that was distinguishably Jewish. And oh, By the way, shaving their heads on marriage also banned. And what's most interesting though is his rationale. It has a curious echo. This was him. That Jewish dress was not required by the religion of the Jewish people. And indeed, their distinctive dress was one of the chief reasons their progression towards civilization had been held back. That's from the 19th century, and it's amazing what an echo. And I think there's a common narrative behind it. And it's one, the real agenda is the humiliating nature of the enforcement itself, which is state Islamophobia, state racism, that fuels every single other form of far-right prejudice and fascism. And I just want to finish with this point, because you see, it's not that Islamophobia is the only racism we face. We have Black Lives Matter, we have the Polish migrant murdered. But I'll tell you one thing why it's so important that we place it right at the centre alongside the battles against every form of racism. It is becoming a central engine and driver by every state across Europe, by every nasty far-right organisation. Just as anti-Semitism was the central driver that consumed the Roma, black people, the left and everyone else. If you didn't stand up against that, then the others will pass. So we have to place the fight against Islamophobia in November, in Islamophobia Awareness Month. I think we want platforms with Poles, with Roma, with black, with white, with Jew, saying we're against Islamophobia because it's our struggle, our fight, and we're going to take it on.